Hello everyone. If you're watching this, you either want to know more about autism from someone who has lived with it using a mix of research from numerous scholarly and general information articles, personal experience, historical facts, statistical analysis, and what employment resources are available to help make the most of the unique gifts we have of such things as hyper-focus on minute details and the like. Or perhaps you're watching this video as a pitch for a prospective panel, albeit without an audience to ask questions along the way. Or maybe you're here for both reasons. Either way, I think you'll find what I have to present quite informative and interesting. I will present on the presumption that no matter your motives or purpose for clicking on this video, that you want to know about autism, so without further ado, let's get into it. For starters, some of you will be seeing this at a convention or wherever you happen to be on the 28th of September, if I'm not mistaken. It'd be Saturday. Anywho, if you're watching this as a video premiere, don't worry. What you're seeing here isn't a glitch. This is all part of the plan. I'm actually going to respond to your questions both in the live chat and or after this video is complete. And to do that, I will be standing by, and what you're seeing now is a pre-recorded video, acting as if it's a live video. Yeah, sorry to ruin the magic for you there, but I've stalled long enough. It's time to get to the premiere! Alright, this panel is called Autism the Misunderstood. Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Adam, also known as the Forsaken Scribe, or Yin Yang the Dutch Angel Dragon when in fursuit. Today, I want to talk about autism, the history of it and what it implies for those on it and what can be done, how it manifests itself. If you've watched the TV lately or in the past decade, you might remember such depictions as Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory or the main character from The Good Doctor. Personally, in the latter case, I love the episode where he didn't know how to lie well, and it showed nicely that just because we have difficulty believing in that which we cannot see doesn't mean we're without a moral compass. Another good example would be non-speaking person Carly Fleshman with assistive technology who hosts her own talk show. Before we go any further, I need to emphasize these examples, while a nice breath of fresh air from the more negative stereotypes we may be placed in, are by no means to be taken by the norm, as this is a spectrum. For example, I'm hardly good at math or anything based on it, and while I have skills as a writer and or a poet, I'm by no means perfect at grammar, and even trip over commas and little things others miss as well. Likewise, I'm still a novice at technology and a lot of other things, but through determination and a will to make something of myself, I'm carving out a future in the best way I can. What's interesting is one would think working fast food, for an example, would be the complete opposite of what one on the spectrum might do, but either by luck or some skill I didn't know that I possessed, I was a cashier at Carl's Jr. for 4 years, and worked at Auticon for a couple more, concurrently with that. And now I work as an office administrative assistant at a Topgolf in El Segundo. Did that for a couple of years, and they're cross-training me to work in the guest services. So yeah, I'm moving around in life, it seems. That being said, I'd be remiss not to mention that the purpose of this panel isn't to be a substitute for a formal diagnosis for being on the spectrum. You might relate to a lot of it, but it's, that doesn't mean you necessarily have it, for lack of a better term. If anything, I'm just trying to make the autism spectrum make sense to people who may not be on it. Now, if, however, you happen to be on it, hey, welcome to the club, there's room for plenty. I should also mention, I'm not a psychologist. I mean, I helped a few people with some psychology papers, but I don't consider that undergoing the same rigors as them with the lectures and all that jazz to get the master's degree and the PhD. But I have lived with it, and I have, on my spare time, read books such as Pretending to be Normal, Autism Answer books, and other informative scholarly articles I could find on the interwebs, some of which made it in this presentation. And so, in that, I consider myself more knowledgeable than average, but I'm not to be used as an authoritative source for anything with respect to this, but rather I'm akin to, at best, what popular science is to the rest of us. That is, they're a science journal rather than the experts who do the research. With that out of the way, let's define what autism is. Autism is a mental condition characterized by difficulty in communicating and forming relationships with other people, and in using language and abstract concepts. What that means is, I may have difficulty explaining what that is, if not for the fact that I prepared in advance. So what it is, let's say you were to come up to me and say, "Hey Adam, how you doing? Having a great day? Are you working hard or hardly working?" I personally would know what you're trying to imply there, that it's all just small talk and all that, but someone else might be like, "Are you insinuating I don't work hard enough?" Or they might be like, "Huh?" It took a little while to understand how idioms work. The nose to the grindstone, I'm like, why would you ever put your nose there? Just as an example. Or you got money coming out of your ears? It's like, no I don't. Now for a little bit of history. Here I'm gonna kind of briefly go over how the spectrum has come. I mean, there's been 5 updates to the manual so far. I'm gonna cover stuff that pertains to the 4th and 5th to kind of get you up to speed with how we got here. And I'll start with the timeline of the history here. Eugene Bleuler coined the term autism in 1908 amongst severely withdrawn and schizophrenic people. In 1943, American psychiatrist Leo Kanner studied 11 children. The children had difficulties in social interactions, difficulty in adapting to changes in routines, good memories, sensitivity to stimuli, allergies to food, good intellectual potential, echolalia, or propensity to repeat words of the speaker, and difficulties in spontaneous activity. In other words, if you're wondering what any of that means we might make the grade as far as, we might have an extensive vocabulary that can explain how stuff works, but maybe we have trouble putting it to pen, or vice versa, we might be better at writing it than saying it. So that's where the whole potential idea is. Good memory, well, I remember when it was music day, I never guessed a single instrument question wrong in the entire time that I was in preschool. And it was literally just, what instrument is this? And then they'd go through a line of them, and then afterwards they would quiz us on which each one was after saying it a few times. Changes in routines, that's things like, if you're lucky, you might work a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday schedule, but if you're like me and you're working a fairly untraditional job, you might be working in the daytime, one day you might be working the nighttime another day, or maybe somewhere in the mid-afternoon. Really throws off the circadian rhythm, and for people on the spectrum it can be especially difficult as, we're very routine-based at times. That's what that means. As far as echolalia, imagine I'm talking to you and then you're repeating back to me exactly as I'm talking to you what I'm saying right now in this moment, and then you might miss a bit of information because you couldn't talk as fast as I could at the time, or if you could, you only processed so much while you were talking at me at the time I was talking at you. So that's what that is. Interesting story about that. Recently one of my sisters who is epileptic, that is, she has seizures, she was diagnosed at, she's 8.5 years older than me, I'm 34. I'll let you kind of do the math. She just got diagnosed as being Autism Spectrum, like maybe late last year, if not early this year. So yeah, women get autism too. It's just not as widely diagnosed. Same with ADHD as it happens. But I digress. Now we're getting into even more history, and this is where things get kind of interesting. In 1944, Hans Asperger, worked separately and studied a group of children. His children also resembled Connor's descriptions. Remember, he coined the autism term before. The children were able to study, but they didn't have echolalia as a linguistic problem. They spoke like any other adult. That was actually something that I was able to do fairly early in life. I'd charm people. They'd be like, "Is this really a kid?" With how he spoke. He also mentioned that many of the children were clumsy and different from normal children in terms of fine motor skills. That's true. I've always had a little bit of balance difficulty. I'm clutching the railing on the stairs as I'm walking up and down it, because I'm probably one of the only people in the world that can fall up or down the stairs if I'm not careful. Especially if I'm wearing a fursuit. For the furries in the audience. Because you know how we have those big old paws, it's like clown shoes. Anyway, as for Hans Asperger, he was working for, I'll just say, the camps. That's why Asperger's has kind of fallen out of favor, but I'll get to that shortly. Bruno Bettelheim was next to do a study and blamed autism in children on cold mothers. In other words, mothers that just don't seem to care or nurture their children enough. Bernard, however, begged to differ and said that no, it's not lack of nurture or the way they nurture to blame. And back in the 1970s, autism was thought to be a form of intellectual intellectual disability or psychosis. They called it something different back then, but I prefer to use inclusive language as much as possible without taking too much away from the history of how things were. And that's where we get to the spectrum umbrella. I mentioned here that, a lot of this information, this was DSM-4, and we did still use it for a little while, but then it's not in use as of at least last year, if not longer ago. I've been doing this panel for at least a couple of years now, and finally got to set the record straight with that. I mean, forward. So with that, I'm going to present how it used to be, and the first item we notice on the umbrella, going from left to right, we're not reading Hebrew here, is autistic disorder. That's a general form of autism. People with it can experience behaviors under conditions such as hand flapping. You can probably see it on the camera right now. I'm just flapping my hands. No offense. That's what they mean by hand flapping. And maybe they can't pay attention, or difficulty understanding abstract concepts. I mentioned before about the idioms, it might be like, huh? Or maybe it's difficult for me to convey what I intend to say in a way that you might understand. And then we have Asperger's disorder, which, again, they dropped this because of the connections to the people that thankfully we defeated in World War II. That was considered and I don't mean to sound elitist here, but this is what they termed it as, the higher functioning autism spectrum disorder that is often diagnosed in children who appear to have limited interest in social interaction, but may be gifted in a subject or two and average to below average in others. And to that, I simply say, you don't have to worry about the umbrella anymore. Just say autism spectrum disorder, or person on the spectrum, or person with autism, because it's all basically one thing now. And then we had child disintegrative disorder. In other words, what would happen is a person would learn how to tie their shoes, they'd learn how to eat, sleep, get up, dress themselves, and, talk to people. But then the next day, out of nowhere, all that's gone. So that's what that was. And then we had Rett's disorder, which is very similar. Although it's more emphasized on a loss of motor functions that they've learned and inability to use their hands. They might also have prolonged fits of laughter or crying. And again, they lose their language skills and they weren't really able to hold down a job. However, I should mention that as of recently, Rett's disorder is no longer part of the autism spectrum anymore. It's become its own thing entirely. And then we've got pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. This is probably the last thing I was diagnosed with when they still had the umbrella in effect, before it was Asperger's. And similar to Asperger's, as it was once called, you could have a much wider variety of difficulties, and it's presumably a lifelong condition. It'll vary in how it manifests, but it could include things like language comprehension and usage, difficulties with nonverbal language such as gestures and facial expressions, difficulty understanding social relations or surroundings, sensitivity to noise, difficulty sleeping, aggressive behavior, and fearfulness and anxiety. And in my case, I never bothered to really learn to tie my shoes. I mean, I can, but they come undone not long after I start walking, so I stick to slip-ons. Now we come to the more current information, the new autism spectrum. So, discarding aside for a moment the umbrella as it used to be referred to, we now understand autism to be 3 levels, at least for medical purposes. That's not to say that one should fall into the trap of thinking, oh, just because they're on that level, they should be able to do everything else someone else on that level can. And to that I say, just because you've met someone on the spectrum only means that you've met a person on the spectrum. It doesn't mean that everyone is like that. So with that, it should be mentioned that medical professionals use this to assess what the needs level is for each individual and prescribe appropriate therapies. For instance, it wouldn't be appropriate to necessarily prescribe someone who's very well spoken one of those devices that some of the people who experience difficulties with speech might use to talk to us, like they might type it. Like if you knew Stephen Hawking, for instance, as an example, he had a similar device for when he wanted to say things because he didn't have the ability to speak as I am right now. So yeah, they wouldn't do something like that for me, as I wouldn't need it. And as I said before, it's all understood to be one diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So with that, I go to level 1. That describes a person who requires support, but maybe not, the most support. They might have a hard time communicating with regular, everyday, average Joe type people, including their peers. They might communicate in full sentences most of the time, but have trouble engaging in extended back and forth communication with other people. They might have social anxiety and may experience burnout from long-term masking or acting neurotypical, as it was once called. Still kind of in some circles. They may also have trouble moving from one activity to another or trying new things. Organization and planning independence may also vary. That is, they might not say the right thing at the right time or be able to read the room always, that can sometimes be a thing. Or maybe they're so excited to share something with you that they're not noticing that, oh, you're not in a good headspace for it, and then naturally you'd be like, who is this person? What are they trying to do right now? Now, for level 2, that requires substantial support, so it's the next level up. It's somewhere in between the least, the least accommodations needed versus most. And they're going to have a harder time masking than those diagnosed with the level 1 form. They might find it hard to communicate or socialize in ways that are accepted or understood by regular people. Likewise, they'll find it harder to change focus or shift from one activity to the next. The DSM's level 2 expression of autism includes people who have very specific interests and who engage in repetitive behaviors that veer far from accepted behaviors or that appear in spaces neurotypical people view as incongruous. One reason that autistic people stim more is because most of our society was not built with neurodivergent people in mind. Hence the regulation that is sometimes that is covered by societal infrastructure for regular people has to be handled by people who aren't neurotypical and their loved ones. And people who express level 2 or what I'm going to get to level 3 traits will have a larger burden of self-regulation. For an example, this might be someone who paces back and forth during a class or a meeting, say the same thing over and over again. They might stim, they might be hand flapping, they might be, snapping their fingers periodically. They might break into song off certain trigger phrases as I've sometimes done, even though I don't know where I'd fall on this necessarily. I want to say I'd be more toward the level 1, but I'd be humble enough to accept that maybe I might be more level 2 sometimes. Or maybe they tap their pencil, which used to annoy many a teacher to death back in the day, at least the ones I've had. Or they might want to get up and dance for seemingly no reason at all, like no one's watching. And now we get to level 3, which requires very substantial support. So these are the people who need the most support. They're most at risk for neglect, abuse, discrimination. They'll have many of the same traits as those with level 1 and 2 diagnoses, but are entirely unable to mask and have very high burdens of self-regulation. They might have difficulty expressing themselves accurately, both verbally and with body language or facial expressions, and it can be very hard for them to complete daily living tasks, interact socially, deal with change and focus or location. Some of these difficulties can be assuaged with early access to augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC devices. That's where I mentioned if they're not able to speak verbally as I am, they might be given a device that helps them type in what they want to say, and it'll audit bullet for us. And engaging in repetitive behaviors, I've mentioned that to death by now. So that's definitely a thing. Though they might be less able to mask it, as alluded to. They're not likely to try to initiate interactions with others, especially if they're not on the spectrum as well. And when they do, you might see them as being kind of awkward. They might, knowing this, because pretty sure they can tell when you find them awkward to some extent. Then they see another kid playing, as an example. They might watch what they're doing and kind of copy them, but not really play with them, as it were. Or maybe they'll interact based on scripted things that they're prepared to say at any given time for any given situation. But as I reiterate before, though these are a useful means of determining what kind of support someone needs, none of them give a full picture of the capacity, strengths, and the specific needs each one will have as a person, that is an individual. Nor do they encompass the specific lived experiences that come with it. And currently, there isn't really a lot of specificity regarding the types of support that individuals will need or when it's needed. For example, some might need accommodations at school but would be fine at home, while others may just be the opposite. Or people can, through social skills training or other methods, they can shift in terms of what they're able to do. As I mentioned, I was originally diagnosed as Asperger's, but then my psychologist said, well, actually you're more PDD-nosed because you're a little more social than you used to be. So in that vein, I imagine someone who's borderline between levels 1 and 2 on the spectrum might be able to jump from 2 to 1 with the right supports. Likewise, there are many other variables in play, such as anxiety, depression, trauma, burnout, which can make things appear more severe or even manifest more severely. And that's pretty much the what there is to know on that. I'm sure some of you will probably be asking some questions in the comments section by the time I've mentioned all this. But since I can't see that yet, I'm moving on to sensory differences. And with that, we might note that people on the autism spectrum can be plagued with what is known as sensory overload. Let's say you as a person, regardless of whether you're on the spectrum or not, find something particularly annoying. Maybe it's a high-pitched sound. Maybe an alarm goes off and you can't get it to turn it off. You might notice that, but be able to kind of find a way to tune it out. But someone like me would just be like, make it stop! And likewise shut down. And people might perceive me as seeming insane in that moment. And in that moment, how they handle the situation is mostly something that's learned and not something that just happens. Now, what does this look like in school or work? More specifically, in my case, I had the the poor cursive, or illegible penmanship when I was in my first 4 years of school, which, led to being chided when I tried my hardest, which led to me taking it personally, which led to inappropriate behavior in the classroom, such as talking out of turn or interrupting or doing anything that would agitate the instructor. I slowly took less and less interest in my peers as they seemed, from my perspective, immature, because to me, I'm like, God, that's annoying, therefore they must be immature. And when I could bring myself to play with others, I like to control the situation because I felt like I had no control at home or in school outside of very specific circumstances. And I hated it when I felt like I was outvoted because I'm like, well, my opinion clearly doesn't matter for anything. That's being an example of what you should be seeing on the slide right now, just as from personal experience. Obviously, your experience will vary, your mileage will vary. Maybe you have other things that irk you, but that was just something that comes to mind. Now, in the workplace, if you were to actually walk in and into the back office, you might see me with a pile of papers seemingly everywhere, but I'm like, I know where that is. Okay, I got it. I'm doing it. Okay, I got it. And then at the end of the day, it's all cleaned up as if nothing had ever happened. Or I might be struggling with something and I know I'm struggling with it, but I'm like, I should know this. We went over it in training. How do I not know this? Anybody who's anybody should know this. And then it just gets into that loop where one can get trapped in their own head as they try to find a solution that doesn't come. And at times I feel like no one understands me. They take half a fact that I might present and run with it, and I'm like, no, you're missing this particular context here. And as you may have noticed from the video, and I'm very hyper animated when I emphasize things that are important to me. And it's easy for me to start, conversing with someone, but then start to be like, oh, and by the way, did you know about, and then I'll just go on a constant stream of tangents, and I might have to stop myself and say, oh, by the way, what's been happening with you lately? So the consequences of that was you might fail writing or spelling tests because they can't read what you wrote. It doesn't mean you can't spell. And I did, my reading, and it seems consistent with what I've read about as well as my own experiences. So that's why I'm like, okay, this is from multiple perspectives I can present and confirm. So someone will likely have at least one of those things I just mentioned, or something similar. And if you yourself, relate to it, I reiterate before, it doesn't mean you're on the spectrum. It just means I'm doing my job and making this understandable for you. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean you can't benefit from some of the emotional regulation therapies such as EQ or EI, whatever they want to call it. Basically, the idea is you might take steps to focus on your emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, and that can be through things like mindfulness, deep breathing and all that. But so that may be helpful to you regardless of your spectrum status or lack thereof. And with that, I bring you to some education statistics. 1%. 1% of the world population is on the autism spectrum as of 2014, and yes, I checked it again. 2023, it's about the same. Prevalence in the United States, however, increased. It used to be 1 in 59 in 2018, but now it's 1 in 36 births. More than 3.5 million Americans live with autism spectrum disorder. That was the case in 2014, but as of 2017, we find that 5,437,988 Americans live with autism spectrum disorder according to the CDC in 2024. And the statistic of the 1% in the adult population in the United Kingdom having a form of autism spectrum hasn't changed any, but I take that with a grain of salt, as the culture hasn't quite fully embraced the emotional wellness movement that much of the States has yet, at least in terms of their research funding and putting it towards that. But they got a new administration now. They're not run by the same party anymore, so we'll see if anything changes in that regard in the next 10 years or so. Well, next 4 years even. But then we got that big number, 119.4%. That's the prevalence of increase one would have found between the year 2000 from 1 in 150 to 1 in 68 to 2010, according to the CDC's 2014 findings. Autism still is the fastest growing developmental disability, and we're looking at an approximate increase of 6 to 15% of new diagnoses based on biennial numbers every year. Now, you might remember a certain charity might say the chances of having a child on the spectrum is 1 in 103. Yeah, no, it's way more common than that nowadays. I won't mention them by name because I'm not about to get sued, especially as this is a recorded video, and they could use that if I mentioned them by name. But I largely think that the reason for the rate of increase is better diagnostics, more people, shedding the stigma of getting diagnosed, and the fact that it's not as much of a deterrent as it used to be to marry someone with a disability like this or to have a kid together. Though, with that, I should mention this isn't a disease that one catches or develops later in life, like a cold or cancer, respectively. So to say that there's an increase in rates is something of of a misnomer. Rather, it's just that hereditarily speaking, you have a higher chance of being on the spectrum if someone in your family has been diagnosed as such. And autism is something that you're born with. It doesn't just come to you later in life. It may not be diagnosed right away, but it's always there with you, which is why it came as no surprise to me that my sister was diagnosed later in life, because she showed some of the classic signs, but doctors were a little hesitant to diagnose her. And likewise, we're also seeing people get the diagnosis younger, so it's that question of the chicken and the egg. Which of these came first? Was it the diagnosis, the knowledge of the diagnosis? And then we come to that 35%. 35% of young adults aged 19 to 23 on the spectrum have not had a job or received postgraduate education after leaving high school in 2012, and it costs more than $8,600 extra a year to educate a student with autism. And now we get to some employment statistics. In June of 2014, only 19.3% of people with disabilities in the US were participating in the workforce, that is, working or seeking work. Of those, 12.9% were unemployed, meaning only 16.8% of the population with disabilities was employed. By contrast, 69.3% of the people without disabilities were in the labor force, and of those, 65% of the population without disabilities was also employed, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics 2014. Now, in 2023, that figure rose to 22.5% employed and 7.2% unemployment for disabled people as a whole, and up to 10.2% unemployment for racial minorities, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics 2024 results. You might be thinking right now, well, wait, how can we have 22.5% employed and 7.2% unemployed for specifically people with disabilities? I have linked the sources in the description below as well, so you can see where they get their numbers. But my best answer, absent spending hours looking that over and doing the math, is to say that these figures do not account for people who have given up on seeking work, have been terminated, or otherwise are in a figure that the employment metrics wouldn't look for regardless of whether you had a disability or not. And that should make up any discrepancies with respect to the disabled to not disabled that are employed versus unemployed. Now, with the financial costs of autism, they cost $236 billion to $262 billion annually, according to Boucher. Though a lot of that information is being contested at this point, it hasn't been fully disproven, just that the way it was presented in some of the studies that used it, they were retracted from the site, but others that use it, such as the one that you'll see toward the end of the presentation, used it and they haven't taken that down, so I assume it's not that the monetary figures are necessarily wrong, but just how a previous source had presented it. And the majority of those costs are, as I say, adult services, and then children, of course, are slightly under by a factor of 100. But regardless of what the real truth is, it is without a doubt that 2/3 of these costs can be reduced with early diagnosis and intervention. And that's why we likely saw at least a small bump in increased employment versus unemployment for people with any kind of disability. And the US cost of autism over the lifespan is $2.4 million for a person with an intellectual disability, or $1.4 million with a person without, according to Boucher. And that original figure rose from $3.6 million for the whole of the US to $7 trillion for all diagnosed individuals, based on the value of $1 in 2019. That's if we assume the rate of autism diagnosis doesn't change. We can expect that figure will be $11.5 trillion between 2020 and 2029, according to Janet Cocker and Richard Fry and Stephen J. Walker. J. Walker. They were that other article that I pointed to that used the same data as the Boucher, but weren't in any way cited with oh, by the way, this particular figure is wrong, so that's why I kept the old figures here. I was very careful about that. Now, you may be wondering, well, what can we do about all of this? We can find ways to accommodate the needs of the neurodiverse in the workplace and academic settings. You can support charities and organizations. I personally go to Autism Self-Advocacy Network because that's my choice. Moreover, you can be more open to hiring people on the autism spectrum and encourage employees to attend a seminar on disability acceptance. Kind of like the one I'm trying to hold here. With that, I've given you all the bad news, and if you haven't already left the room, this is where we get into the good part. The strengths. This is why people should hire you. Autistic people can have many strengths, including expertise. They will often have said expertise in topics that interest them. For me, I'm a little bit above average in writing. Not perfect, but I'm there. And particularly, I have something of a knack for poetry. Like, I can churn out a poem in 15 minutes if I'm really feeling in that zone. Otherwise, it'll take me about an hour or two to get a one-page poem. Likewise, we're known to have hyperfocus. We can concentrate for long periods of time when motivated. We can have attention attention to detail, exceptional memory for details and patterns. Like, I've heard of people who can recite 100 digits of pi. I'm not one of those, but goodness gracious, I mean, that takes a very special interest to be able to do that, I think. Likewise, I would be the one to notice if, say, my presentation had a letter out of place in a particular sentence. I'd be like, got it. And likewise, creativity, it goes without saying that, we tend to be imaginative and quite creative, which is interesting because I had read some books that suggested that we come off as being the opposite, that because of our narrow interests, we come off as not being creative or imaginative, but actually, we're finding the opposite is true in recent years. So, hey, we've come a long way. Likewise, we may be good at problem solving, especially creatively, like doing math, some of us can. But let's say you gave us a problem like, we're having this particular inefficiency with with the way we operate our business. If one of us was, say, trained in systems analysis, we could say, okay, well, if you integrate this particular process into that particular process in such a way as to make that happen, it'll be far more efficient for you for the checkout process. The loading times will be quicker and all that, without getting too technical as to be teaching computer science or computer information systems. And likewise, they're going to bring a unique perspective to teamwork and collaboration if you hear them out. And likewise, some people think we come off as unempathetic because most of the time we're kind of looking like this. But actually, we have quite a bit of empathy, whether it's for our family pets or other people on the spectrum who are like us. And likewise, there's a sense of justice. I, for one, can attest that, I had a very strong sense of, if this is wrong, it should be stopped. No matter how much or little authority I have to do it, I have to see it done, That was my thinking at the time. So I considered myself rather loyal to those who were after kind of the same sense of fairness, justice, equity, all that. And I definitely did respect authority when I saw that it was going in the direction that I was taught it should. Likewise, it was hard to stay silent when I saw injustice happening at times, but some of us do learn to, unfortunately, if we know we can't do anything about it, we might learn not to do anything, or we might just intervene anyway, for better, for worse. And for our final set of strengths, we can have a heightened sense of sensory perception and less influenced by socially driven biases, and have a rare freshness and sense of wonderment for all that we come to understand. What that is we do have a heightened sense of hearing, hence the alarm trigger I mentioned before, and likewise, we may grow apathetic to how people perceive us because we're used to being seen a certain way, and thus their opinion stops mattering the more we come to realize the value of ourselves. And with that, here are some businesses and programs who have gotten the memo on how things are. We'll start with the Spectrum Center.
Spectrum Center is a school system for students with special needs, and we custom design solutions for school districts in order to be able to help serve students in the most appropriate way possible.
Spectrum Center schools and programs joined in 2004, and we partner with public school districts to provide quality programs to educate children and young adults with autism spectrum disorders, developmental delays, emotional disturbances, behavioral challenges, or other special needs. Spectrum is a viable and proven solution for public school districts that don't have all the resources to serve children with special needs. We believe all students can learn and succeed, and our dedicated and compassionate teachers and staff help students with differing abilities advance educationally, behaviorally, and socially. Our teachers and staff are experts in working with students with special needs, and they are skilled at providing applied behavior analysis therapy, commonly known as ABA therapy, which is the foundation of our evidence-based instructional program. Since it was established in 1975, Spectrum has continually evolved to meet the needs of the growing number of students who have challenging educational and behavioral needs. We are committed to positively impacting the lives of our students and families, providing services in the least restrictive environment, and transitioning students back to their district school.
One of our primary beliefs here at Spectrum School is that all students can learn and all students can be successful.
Within, say, the first 2 or 3 months, you're seeing significant gains with math, reading fluency, reading comprehension, and it's basically embedded into the entire program.
One of the things that we hear from parents a lot is that they see their students change after they come to Spectrum.
We improve lives by providing behavioral health and education solutions with guaranteed accountability and integrity of service. We are grounded in servant leadership and a social mission to offer hope. The Spectrum story is our story.
that, you may have heard the term applied behavioral analysis. That was the popular way of handling people on the autism spectrum at the time, but in recent years, it's far more recommended that either they get cognitive behavioral therapy or something similar in which they are taught how they come off, but in a way that's compassionate and understanding where they're coming from and how they can best negotiate the gap between what the expectations are of regular people and what their needs are, so that we can come to a mutual understanding. And here we come to MindSpark. Now, I mentioned Auticon earlier, but before they were Auticon, which was the German-based company that merged with them, they were known as MindSpark. But ultimately, their mission didn't change any in all the time that I knew them. So this should still, prove the point that I want it to do, which was basically this father decided he wanted to create opportunities for his son to succeed and make use of the tools he had, because at that time, we didn't have a lot of opportunities if we had noticeable signs of being on the spectrum. This will be a common theme, as you'll see.
This holiday is about gratitude for the gifts we've been given, including the special talents each of us has. Sometimes those talents are not obvious, and our final story this Thanksgiving is about a company that discovered a special ability in some folks and put them to work. Here's Carter Evans.
The most surprising thing about Max Parker's morning routine is that he has a job to go to at all.
If something doesn't go as expected, you basically raise a red flag.
Yeah, you could say that.
Parker is a software analyst. He's also autistic.
When you were growing up, did you ever envision a job like this?
To be perfectly honest, no.
Roughly 75% of autistic adults are unemployed, in part because the brain disorder makes it difficult to interact with others. But many with autism also have an uncanny ability to focus intensely on minute details, perfect for the job of hunting for glitches in computer software.
This is not a charity, right? And our employees are good at what they do. In this area, we have the training room.
Chad Hahn is CEO of MindSpark. The software designer used to outsource work to India, but his wife, a social worker, convinced him high-functioning autistic adults like Parker are well suited for the job.
If we were to look at a set of instructions every day, and we had to go through those same instructions over and over again, I don't know about you, but I would miss some things.
I would too.
And Max doesn't miss things.
What you find in autism is thinking that relies less on the frontal cortex.
Dr. Marcel Just studies autism at Carnegie Mellon University. His research has found that most people rely on the front of the brain to process the big picture around them. But with autism, the wiring between the front and the back is not as strong, so thinking is dominated by parts of the brain that handle details.
If you do Where's Waldo, people with autism are known to do better at that kind of task, finding little detail in a big picture. And the reason is they could focus on the detail without being distracted by larger picture issues.
Parker is one of 3 autistic employees at MindSpark.
This is how we check the programmer's work.
And more are training in an on-site classroom.
They just needed a chance. Think about how hard it's been for them all these years, where people have dismissed them and their abilities and maybe overlooked what they could do or could be.
Let's see what the steps are again.
Providing opportunity and a paycheck.
Oh, that's as big as it'll get.
All right.
Carter Evans, CBS News, Santa Monica.
So yeah, it's going to be a common theme that it starts with father seeing a need or a family member and realizing, hey, I know someone who's good at it and they live with us. And so they start to look for other talent that is similar. And besides Auticon, formerly known as MindSpark, we also have Exceptional Minds based in Sherman Oaks. They're a nonprofit company which is a hybrid vocational employment company that aims to help utilize the unique gifts people on the spectrum have. If you're not much for software analysis but see yourself as having an eye for detail and you love digital media, maybe they can help you. Let's see.
Black Panther is nominated tonight for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It's the first superhero movie ever to receive a nomination in that category. The world of Wakanda was created through stunning visual effects, some of them by the Exceptional Minds at One Studio. Joe Fryer has our Sunday closer.
To create an Oscar-nominated movie like Black Panther, it takes thousands of creative minds, one of which belongs to visual effects artist Tony Saturno.
This is before the operation, and this is after.
He was tasked with getting rid of all the production stuff you're not supposed to see in this scene.
I needed to remove these flags here and here and here.
Tony works at Exceptional Minds, a nonprofit studio for artists who are on the autism spectrum.
It feels very rewarding, to say the least.
It was founded in 2011 by parents of children with autism. Susan Zwerman is the studio's executive producer.
I always wanted to help others to aspire to become something, to be better in their lives.
Exceptional Minds started as a 3-year school teaching graphic and visual effects, and more recently, animation.
I actually was the one that provided the voice for that.
Generally speaking, areas where you can focus, where you can work on detail, those are things that are conducive for a lot of individuals who are on the spectrum.
In 2014, they added a studio, giving graduates a place to work. Before long, they were teaming up with box office powerhouses like Marvel Studios.
The idea was to do slow steps, give them more and more work as they succeeded, and they did over and over and over and over.
Eli Katz worked on Black Panther, erasing stray hairs and cleaning up other imperfections.
You must be very patient.
Yeah, yes I am.
We go hand in hand with their focus and determination makes our movies far better.
Exceptional Minds has worked on 44 TV shows and 84 films, including Black Panther, Green Book, First Man, and Solo, a Star Wars story, all Oscar nominees.
I said, wow, we worked on that. When I shared it with the artists, I mean, everybody was cheering.
Perhaps the greatest reward is seeing their work on the big screen and their names in the credits.
I couldn't help but put my fist up in the air.
For Eli, the best reaction came from a friend.
As soon as he saw my name, he started shouting in joy, telling everyone in the seats that my name was on there.
Were you a little embarrassed or were you proud?
No, a little bit of both.
What can society learn from this?
Try and treat others, with respect and let them live their full potential.
Unlocking creativity that flourishes inside truly exceptional minds. For Sunday Today, Joe Fryer, Los Angeles.
They do beautiful work. Joe, thank you very much.
And so, yeah, some of you may be familiar with that infamous Starbucks coffee that was overlooked. Yeah, maybe they should have hired this company for that. Now, maybe you're not in California, especially as this is an internet video. No problem. Spirit Tech is based in Chicago. Like Auticon, they train and employ people to software test. Microsoft and other large companies are constantly looking for talented people with neurodiversity and changing their interview processes to tap into that. Ford Motors has one as well, alongside the Autism Alliance of Michigan. Easter Seals and Nobies Works in Georgia have a generalized workforce training program and job placement, regardless of what disability you might be having. And I'm gonna kind of have to give a shout out to Topgolf because they have multiple locations in all 50 states. And while they don't have a specific hiring process catered to people on the spectrum necessarily, the more enthusiastic among us can get employed there, whether it's as an office administrative assistant, a facilities associate, golf services, which can include things like check-in, starter, T-liner, assistant pro, greeter, event host, team lead, manager on duty, bay host, EA, food runners, caddies, and of course bartenders and barbacks. If you have questions later, I'll go into more detail about what that would entail, but the presentation's not really about them as much, but I thought it was worth mentioning that, yeah, their hiring processes are among the more inclusive just in terms of, I told them from the get-go that I was on the spectrum and how I could use those strengths to help them out, and they hired me. And I've been there for over 2 years now, so certainly something to look into. Or maybe none of that's your forte, maybe you consider yourself more of a physical person. You want to get hands-on with things. Well, how about this Rising Tide car wash in Parkland, Florida?
Our employees follow processes. They're really excited to be here.
How many cars do we need tonight? About 350.
They have a great eye for detail. We view autism as one of our key competitive advantages. My name is Tom Dieri. Thank you. And I'm the COO of Rising Tide Car Wash. Andrew's my younger brother by about 18 months. We found out Andrew has autism when he was about 3 years old. Growing up with Andrew as a brother, I mean, it was just different. We never really fought. We also, though, never had the closeness that typically siblings that are so close in age would have.
Chips and goldfish. Both, right? What else did you have for lunch?
I don't want him to sit in a room taken care of by others once I'm gone. I want him to have a life. I want him to have a job. I want him to have friends that are like him. So this car wash, it creates an answer for Andrew and also creates an answer for their mom, who's taken care of him and done all the heavy lifting. Where are the reinforcements? She's done all the work. Okay, so that's hard.
What we find in the autism community is that once someone turns 22 and ages out of the school system, there's very little of any meaningful activity. In the autism community, we call that falling off the cliffs. Typically, people with autism are really good at structured tasks, following processes, attention to detail. So we saw that there are really important skills that people with autism have that make them, in some cases, the best employees you could have.
How many are we going to do this weekend?
Hopefully over 1,000. They come to us with very little purpose and very little hope for their future. That door just open up on you?
Yes, it did.
But once they start working with us and they start to get the positive reinforcement of, doing a good job, customer being happy, them getting a tip, that really starts to open them up.
Yeah, it did kind of open up on me.
And they start to be able to think about what they might be able to do with their lives, whether that be stick with us or go do something that is more closely aligned with whatever their aspirations are.
Can you tell me to come to work tomorrow? Help me? Tomorrow? Like on Thursday and a morning shift?
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't have a choice then.
We've seen a lot of really great improvements as far as my closeness with him and his desire to have social interactions and social relationships.
Andrew, you take passenger, time money, you take driver, okay? Melvin's gonna check.
I'll give him orders just like I would give any employee an order. And yeah, he'll roll his eyes at me or not be too thrilled about it, but I feel like that's a normal interaction between a younger brother being told by his boss and his older brother what to do. So that's it's really great.
I'm gonna be 24, and Dad and Tom are the owners of the wash.
How do you like working with them?
I like working with them a lot.
We wanted to try to identify a consumer business that could educate the broad community around how capable people with autism really are. The car wash, at its best, it's very well structured. Every part of the business is a process. And it's a really tangible service. You're gonna see, oh wow, these guys did a great job. Oh hey, all these guys have autism. Okay, you start to fill in the blanks. And hopefully we can change that perception.
And that was Rising Tide Car Wash in Parkland, Florida. Those are not an exhaustive list, but just some examples of what one can look for if they're neurodiverse and they want to increase the employment statistic in a positive direction for us and to make some money, have a sense of purpose. And with that, we have at least one important law in the United States that's on our side, and that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. It gives all people with any sort of disability, diagnosable condition, or even those simply suspected of having a disability. You don't even have to have a disability, but if someone thinks you do, you have the right to work the same as anyone. Moreover, they have to provide you accommodations whether you demonstrably have a disability or they think you do. And these workers' rights extend to schools, colleges, and universities as well as the actual workplace. Not to say the two are mutually exclusive, especially if you work for a university or something. And with that, we come to the Autism and the Furry Fandom and Beyond. The one thing that more or less justifies this presentation to be a furry panel at all, if not for the fact that it just seems to be that those on the spectrum have a comfort in the fandom. And one of the first things you might notice in your fellow furs is they seem like they obsess or worship their chosen craft or interest. Or if you happen to work alongside them, they might come off as overly enthusiastic, really take the company values to heart in the most literal way you can imagine. Let's say you had a policy where they want you to smile. We might be all like, with it, which is a little bit maybe more exaggerated than we need to do. It's still technically fitting what we're asked to do. And let's say they're talking to someone at a fur meet and you're thinking, oh, okay, this seems like an interesting conversation. Maybe I can get in on that. And then they might say something like, this is an A-B conversation, see yourself out of it. And come to find, it's not so much that they're trying to be mean about it, it's just that it can be difficult to keep track of having conversation with multiple people. I myself am guilty of having that difficulty, though I don't necessarily put it like that. But I don't blame people if in the heat of the moment they say that to me and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interjected. And likewise, there may be a certain skepticism to various things, whether it's a scientific study or just something that someone's claiming for any purpose whatsoever. And maybe they were seen as knowledgeable growing up and they feel pressured to stay in that role and to know everything. But as anyone knows, just because you know one thing doesn't mean you know another. Just because you're a writer doesn't mean you're that good at math, as an example. It should be noted that not everyone will exhibit exactly these same things. These are just some examples of what seems common from the albeit limited times I've been to meets in the last 10 years. And I can definitely attest to being a perfectionist in all aspects of life. I'm always questioning everything that I do, even this video presentation, even the stuff that, you're thinking, man, that's an amazing poem. I'll be nitpicking it, I'll be like, no. I ended it the cliche way. I should have said, or things of that nature. And likewise, knowing that I'm not the best at handling losing at things at times, depends on how much I care about it. If I don't care about it, then whatever. But if I do, I tend not to compete because I care, because I don't want to lose friends over it. I'm sure anyone who's played a game of Monopoly or a similar other game that goes on way too long, and then once it's finally over, there's a mix of relief but also resentment going on in the room. You might understand what that's like. That can also pertain to seemingly fun things like fursuit dance comps, writing contests, design contests. Even if I know I can win these things, I might opt out of participating because of XYZ that I'll make up. And because I feel like people sometimes get me wrong, I may feel this compulsion to justify why I like or dislike things in great detail, but I've learned to pull back over the years on that because at the end of the day, most people don't care as much as I think they do half the time. I mean, not that they don't care, that I feel a certain way, but just that they don't care specifically that I don't like going on roller coasters as an example. And likewise, you may notice that other people who share a similar thought process, we might go to an extreme length to ensure the happiness of our small circle of friends, even if it hurts us in the long run. Maybe it's that person that brings this giant box of guilt on Hanukkah to a party, or something similarly over the top, but also seen as a nice thing when taken properly. Likewise, it's possible that one may find it difficult to take constructive criticism because of the perfectionism I mentioned, especially if it's something that has to do with a weakness and something that specifically is a feature of being on the autism spectrum, because it's like, well, yeah, I know I need to do better at that, but how? Likewise, it's not uncommon for one to have certain quirks or mannerisms. Many people call these stims. In my case, if I'm talking to you and you or I say a certain series of words, I'll feel this compulsion to want to break out into a song that it reminds me of. I may at times try to be too relevant to people sometimes. Or if I see that you're in a time of hardship, I might recount a similar experience, but that's not me trying to upstage you or anything or compare battle scars. That's me trying to tell you, hey, you're not alone. I've been down that road before and I know how awful it feels. And while it may or may not be the same pain as what you're dealing with now, I'm here for you. And likewise, it may seem like we're in our heads self-centered or whatever, when actually it's just that internal or external things are going on that other people can't see that are taking our focus in that moment. Other examples of stims might be things like, maybe if they're more into instruments, you might catch them stacking papers to a beat, or drumming on tables. And if you recognize the beat, you're like, oh, that's that song called Car Wash by Rose Royce or something. If it's like, as an example. Now, what does this all mean for us? Well, it's quite simple. All people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and disability does not entitle people to revoke that right. And while it goes without saying it's illegal to prevent someone from getting a job or being hired to a company on basis of disability, it can be notoriously difficult to prove if they're not blatant about it. Likewise, the best thing you can do for yourself in the world is to try to understand what drives people to act as they do and simultaneously have the courage to understand people and say, well, I don't necessarily agree with where you're coming from, but I understand, at least to some extent, that this isn't coming from a place of trying to be this, that, or the other thing, but a genuine concern for the well-being of others. Likewise, for the parents in the audience, you shouldn't be afraid to enforce acceptable standards of conduct while doing so in a way that helps us understand the why. Because if there's one thing that really stood out to me, just as using Topgolf as an example, is one of our directors said, you get far less pushback from the people you manage if you can give them the why. Why is it that we have this rule in place? Why do we want you to do this? If you do that and they can understand, then more than likely they're gonna follow that rule. Especially if they were, like me, taught that you don't have to follow a rule unless it makes sense. And most importantly, changing how one acts doesn't mean you're not being yourself. It's called being your best self. And these changes may not happen overnight, so patience is key. If I didn't make it abundantly clear earlier, autism is only becoming more of an understood thing as time goes on and more diagnosed. So it's probably in everyone's best interest to try to understand one another as much as they can. And who knows, you may find out we're not so different after all. And with that, I end us on a quote that I personally made up to help people understand the difference between acceptance and awareness. And it's cure what kills, accept what thrills. What that means is, yeah, go ahead, cure cancer, cure whatever physical disease that you can. But if it's something that can have its benefits, like, being on the autism spectrum, you should be accepting of that, because there is no cure for it one way or another. So it's better to leverage than to let talent go to waste, in my view. So whenever you can, extend us a platform to help others, that we may enrich their understanding of how the world actually is through our eyes. With that, I take us to the source slides really briefly. I'll give it a few minutes so you can have a chance to screen cap it and actually look at some of the sources that I used for this. Excuse me. And with that, we've reached the end of the slideshow. I now invite all of you to ask me any questions that you haven't already in the live stream or in the comments section below. And this is usually the part where, if I'm doing this in person, I'll have people discuss amongst each other whatever they want. And if they have any questions, this is the time that I take all the ones that they've been waiting for that didn't just come up during the presentation where I would have stopped and answered, or I didn't, in this case, answer in the live chat already. If you have any more, I'll be periodically checking out this video again to see what's been said and answer as best I can, as well as link sources to back what I'm saying, because while I may not be a psychologist, I am an evidence-based activist. And with that, I bid you the farewell, and have a wonderful day, have a wonderful convention if you're at a convention, have a wonderful work day if you're watching this before work, have a wonderful day if you're on a day off, or have a wonderful day, night, or evening if you're watching this after work. With that, this is Adam, or the Forsaken Scribe, signing out. Bye-bye!